Hello everyone, and welcome to your guide on how to play 1g4, the Grob opening. Most people think of this as really bad, and objectively it's not the best. However, there is a ton of venom and tricks and traps in this, and the best part, a total of 0 people actually know the best way to play against it. Now, there are two kind of chunks to this opening. The first one is if black here goes pawn to d5, attacking your pawn with their bishop. Here, you're going to go bishop g2, the Grob gambit. If they capture here, this is going to let you have a ton of fun. There are so many tricks and traps in this variation. The second chunk is if they kind of do anything else. If they play e5, knight 6, c6, if they play any other move, I'm going to give you a setup which you can play against pretty much all of that. Now, let's start with this, because this is where so much of the fun is, because you can play the move pawn to c4. Now, this does a couple of things. One, you're opening up your your queen to come to b3, which you are almost certainly going to do on the next move, but more importantly, you are immediately attacking that central d5 pawn. Obviously, black doesn't want to lose it, but they also can't really capture you, because then you can just take on b7, and that rook is trapped in the corner. Now, they have a couple of options here, but I'll start with the two biggest ones, which are pawn to e6 and pawn to c6, both trying to defend in the center. Pawn to e6 is likely the worst one, because queen to b3. You are immediately putting more pressure on their center, and attacking b7, you're threatening to win both pawns if black tries to defend them, which is by far the most natural move. Most people do that. It is going to end up badly. b6 is the most common move here, but it is just terrible, because you take on d5, black takes back, and now you take that with your bishop, and they haven't really solved anything. Now, we're attacking their rook in the corner, and their f7 pawn with our bishop and queen. If they try c6, just trying to keep our bishop out, this is once again the most common move, but it is terrible. You take on f7, the king has to move, you now take the knight in the corner. Your queen defends the bishop, rook cannot capture, you are up a full piece and a pawn here, you are completely winning. Their only way to even try and survive is bishop back to e6, defending f7, and pinning our bishop to our queen, but very easily here, you can just capture, trade down, you're up a pawn, they have an awkward position, and you are doing very, very well here. You have no problems really. Their other try to defend is queen c8. This is the second most common move, but it is once again terrible, because you once again can just take in the center. This is a massive problem. Bishop e6 is the only attempt to defend, and now you have a nice move. Queen takes on b7 here. If they take your queen, you take back with your bishop, you're going to win the rook in the corner. If they take your bishop, you take back the queen, and if they do something else, you can very easily trade here, and you are completely safe and up a pawn. So, those both do not work. The only way that black really can survive here is if they let us have the b7 pawn, which people at beginner intermediate level, not a lot of them are going to want to give this up. But first off, knight d7, this is their most common option if they want to just give us it, and what you're going to do here is you actually don't want to capture in this position. What you want to do instead is take on d5, because after captures, and captures, this is still very, very awkward for them to deal with here. The move that they are probably going to play is now queen e7, trying to defend. That is most common move once again, but once again, most common move is just bad. You can just take on b7 here, attack the rook, they are forced to move it, and now queen takes on c7. This is absolutely no threat. Your knight defends that, so you can afford to be greedy here. Take a7 if you want as well. Just remember, get your knights developed, and you're going to be completely fine here, really. You are up a ton of material, just make it out, and yeah, you're winning. The probably best option is c6 to try and get a pyramid and just doing absolutely nothing about the pawn. Once again, a lot of people will just not see that, because it's a pretty hard move to just completely give up the pawn like that, but I recommend to not capture immediately. Why? If you take on d5 first, what's going to happen here is if they take with the c pawn, queen a4 check. Black just blundered away their bishop. They block, you capture. You're up a piece and you are completely winning. If they are smart and they actually avoid that with pawn takes on, or if they're e-pawn capturing on d5, now you take on b7, they can play knight d7, so their queen sees the rook, and at this point you want to capture c6. Don't capture yet though, because rook c8, you get skewered, and that is just a disaster. You're actually completely losing there. Instead, play knight c3 first, and after, like, rook c8, they're trying to defend, go d4 here, and you're really completely fine. I mean, bishop f4 here, pawn e3, get your knight developed, you're doing great. Now onto their slightly better option, which still has so many tricks and traps, and that is here. If they instead play pawn to c6, what I recommend is to take on d5 immediately here. Why? Well, after black takes back and you play queen to b3, you get that same thing. You're attacking both of these pawns, and it's a big problem. e6 is so common here, and if you saw the variation a second ago, you already know the move. Queen a4 check, and black is just losing that bishop. Knight blocks, capture, you are just fully and completely up a piece there. You are completely winning, but this is still a big problem even if they don't make that blunder. So what else can they try? Once again here, the worst move for them is to actually try and defend, yet it's what everybody tries to do. If they back up to bishop c8, this is the second most common move, which I don't know how, because it is terrible. Bishop takes on d5. You're still threatening to win the pawn here. You're now threatening to capture on f7. That is a disaster, so they have to play e6. But I mean, takes, and after knight d7 here, a very easy knight c3. You are up a pawn. At some point, you can drop your queen all the way back to g2 or just somewhere else. Play knight f3. Development is easy, and you are having just a great time there. What about the queen moves? What about queen c7 and queen b8? Or sorry, queen b6. Let's look at queen c7. This is actually not good because knight c3. Now your knight is getting in onto the action. If they try pawn to e6 here, which is just so natural, queen a4 once again, and they are now losing that bishop, so they have to do something else. What about knight f6? This is probably their best option, but you can just take the pawn. Just take the pawn. Captures back. Captures. This is once again a large issue. And after like knight c6 here, which is, I mean, maybe an attempt, but I mean, bishop captures, king slides over, and now you can play h3. That bishop is forced to drop back, and knight f3. Development is pretty easy. You do have to be slightly careful not to get your king in any bad situation, but you're up a pawn. Their king is also equally just a complete disaster. You're actually better than them, so I would say you are definitely doing better there. Eval bar agrees. Now, queen b6 is another option. This one, it's not the greatest move for them, but it is slightly better, because what you want to do here is take on d5. They take your queen on b3, and you don't want to take back your bishop. You actually want to take back your pawn, and you have to be careful with how you play this. You open up your rook to attack their pawns here, and you don't want to rush this. After black goes knight to c6, you want to spend a move, just play knight to f3, and when they play e6, attacking your bishop, you need to capture, black takes back, and now knight to e5. You're attacking their bishop and their pawn, and if they go bishop h3 here, once again, you need to be pretty careful. You don't want to take the pawn, because two moves, actually, bishop g2, you get forked, and rook c8, and you were getting skewered here. Both of those are bad. So to avoid all that mayhem, very easily here, go rook g1, just keep your knight there for a second, then go knight c3. Eventually, you'll want to play rook a6 and invade like so, and you were doing quite well here. Still, be a little careful, but you are doing very well. Their last move here, which is probably their best, is to just fully give up the pawn with knight to f6. Now, what you want to do here, this is their best variation and your toughest, so it's going to be a bit of a struggle. You want to first play knight to c3, put pressure on their pawn. Their best move, e6, very easily defending here. There is no queen a4 now, because their knight is defending their bishop. Here, now, taking the pawn, material is equal. It's called the Grob gambit. It's really not a gambit, because you'll almost always win back the pawn, or even more material. Knight b to d7 now. The rook is protected, and what you want to do here is you want to keep being tricky with the move knight to b5, and they have two big options here, which are rook b8 and rook c8. Rook b8 is definitely the worst option. Why? Because you can now play knight to c7 check, attacking their king. They have to go king to e7, and now queen takes on a7. Engine says they're fine if they go queen c8, but literally nobody plays this. Almost everybody plays a move here like pawn up to g6 or something else that just doesn't do that much, and you can now go queen down to a3. That is a hard tactic to spot, and now their king is trapped. The only way for them to survive is to sacrifice their knight. At this point, you are completely winning. King d7, you have a very nice knight takes on e6, defending your queen, attacking theirs, and there's all sorts of stuff going on here, but at the end of the day, you are going to end up on the winning side. You are up 5 points of material. Other than that, if they play queen c8, I mean, queen a5, keep your knight defended. You're just doing completely fine here. If you have to drop back to b5, you can always play a4. And the best thing about these situations is their queen side is just, it's evaporated. It's off the board, and you still have 2 pawns here. So in all endgames, this is going to be a massive asset because you can just start pushing, and black only has their pieces to stop your pawns, which is going to be a big hassle for them to deal with. Their best move here is rook c8, just stopping any shenanigans, moving our knight in. And you could take the pawn on a7. I would recommend here, though, to instead play knight to f3. Because after bishop c5, pawn up to d4, we're going to get this check most likely. Bishop back to b6 is actually pretty common. Most common move, sorry, but knight d6. And this is just them getting forked. If they see that and they play this check instead, you can go bishop d2, captures, knight captures, and after black castles here, you don't have the greatest position in the world, but you know what? You're surviving. You will be able to play h3 here. Your king is actually somewhat safe just staying here, and you're doing fine. Of course, this is their absolute best variation. I don't think you'll ever even see that in a million years. I will give you one other line here. If you want to be tricky, you can try taking the pawn on a7 with your knight. I can't in goodwill recommend it because if black plays rook b8 here, you are basically just completely lost. However, they can fall for a cool trap, which I do want to show, which is rook to c7. You back your queen up to a6, and now queen to a8. It looks like black is now pinning you, and they're just going to win your knight, but you have a very nice move here. Knight drops back to b5, attacking the rook, attacking their queen. If they capture you, then you get this royal fork. They move, you capture, and you are completely winning there. So that is c6 and e6 covered. Now to get to some of the other options here, which are a little weirder. The first one is black actually can take on c4 and just fully give up the rook, because after knight d7 and captures, although you are up 1 point of material, your position isn't that great. However, you are still doing good here. Pawn to f3, you need to attack their bishop and stop their queen from looking at your rook. If they play something random here, don't capture because you would just lose that. Instead, after they most likely back their bishop up anyways, very simply here, just get your pieces out. After like e6 here, you can play e4, strike in center like so. Bishop has to back up, and you can always play queen a4 here. You'll end up winning a pawn, at which point you'll be up 2 points of material. Even if your position is suffering a little bit in those endgames, that is really going to start coming out, and your development really isn't that bad. Even when you get this out, you can play, pawn to d4, get your bishop out, and you're actually doing quite well there. They can also try a move knight to f6. Actually, first, before I cover knight f6, bishop e6, third most common move. I have no idea how. It's just terrible. What you want to play here, that same idea I've seen a couple times, just queen b3, putting a ton of pressure on them, and this is just terrible. If they take your pawn, then you take on b7, and you're going to be winning the rook, and the complete rook this time, so that is completely lost for black. If they play b6, trying to get your queen out, just take on d5. Bishop moves, knight c3, you are unbelievably dominating here. I mean, this pawn is the pawn to end all pawns. And I guess their best move, maybe c6, trying to defend and giving up b7. But I mean, knight d7, knight c3, eventually you can now take on c6, maybe capture on d5. Everything is just falling apart. This is a positional disaster. Now let's look at knight f6, which is probably their best move or one of their best moves, but it's a similar situation we've had before. What you want to do here is capture on d5, the knight will capture back, and now queen to b3, putting pressure on them like so. Their knight is in the middle, so it's slightly atypical, but it's the same kind of story. After c6 here, you want to take on b7, and knight d7. Don't take on c6 just yet, because that same trick, rook c8, you get skewered, that is bad. Play knight to c3 first, and now you can go, capturing, do everything you want. Your bishop is defended. Go h3, go maybe probably e4 once again in this position, and you are doing quite well. So those are all of the Grob Gambit accepted lines, but what about if they do not accept it, or for that matter, if they play literally anything else? So I'll look at pawn e5 as the example, but once again, this applies to no matter what they play. This is a generalized setup and plan. What you want to do here is, once again, put your bishop on g2, get that entire diagonal, and your ideal plan here, your ideal game plan, would be for black to castle, which they almost always will, because you can then start going h4, g5, h5, and just start a giant attack. That does take a little bit of, finessing to get exactly right, but I'll show you how to do that. d5 is most common here. Black just takes the entire center, and if you don't want to give up the pawn, like in this situation anymore, very simply, h3, just defend the pawn. There's nothing wrong with it. Black now has a couple of options. I'll look at c6 as the generalized thing, but two notes here. A lot of people go e4 trying to block out your bishop, but this is just bad, because d3 here, if they try to defend their center with knight f6, you can always play g5 and move them away. That is always super fun. If instead they trade here, you can just take with your queen, and you'll want to go for a pawn to e4 push. That is a pretty central pawn push here. e4 in the Grob you'll want to do in most of these situations. The other thing is knight to c6. If you ever see knight to c6, this is almost never good, because they block out the c pawn, and that is really important. The black here really wants the pawn to c6. That way the center is defended, because here you can go c4 in a similar situation like we had. If black captured that, I mean, their position is a disaster now. Takes, they have tripled pawns, so that is horrible. And if instead they don't do that, if they play bishop e6, then queen b3. And you can already see some of these similarities. You'll probably play knight c3, d3 here, and you are doing great. You're having so much fun in that position. c6 is likely their best try. Where was I? Bishop g2, d5, h3, c6, likely their best option. Once again, this represents a whole cascade of options for them, though. Here is your plan. You'll want to go d3, black will develop. Now knight c3, because we're building up the e4 pawn push. Wait, my mistake. I actually have my moves bishop d6 instead, but there's so many similar positions, it doesn't really matter. But knight c3, going for that e4 pawn push, and after knight to e7 here, you want to go ahead and play that. Now, you want black, because you're going to go on a kingside attack, you want the center to be closed. You want black to go d4 here. Trading in center, I mean, you can just take with your knight, and this is complete domination here. This is just going great for you. Black has no stake in the center. If instead they try to delay for a move, instead they play bishop e6 here, you just want to delay as well. just go knight g to e2 and just calmly start developing. If they ever play d4, you can just back up to b1. It looks a little funny, but these positions are going to end up being pretty slow, so you have a lot of time to reroute your knight to a better place. But most people here are going to play d4 either now or later, at which point you want to go to e2 and reroute this knight to g3. You have two options from here. Well, actually from here, you can go f4, like after captures. This is good for you, but personally, I'm not the biggest fan of this. You kind of are going to let their queen in after captures, and I don't really want to deal with all those complications. Instead, I prefer knight to g3. Why? You're threatening to go to f5. If black lets that happen, like here, knight to f5, this is an absolute monster of a knight. I mean, that is destroying their position, and if they try to trade it off, you can take either pawn here. I like taking the e pawn, and I mean, oh my god, like, you're gonna go on the craziest pawn push the world has ever seen, and black's king is likely going to fall apart. And the best part of this move, it's not even that, it's the threat. Most common move here is g6, trying to prevent our knight from getting there, but now bishop h6, attacking the rook. They have to slide over, and here you can now play pawn to h4, and you're going to push to h5. You're going to go on this big attack. You can always play queen to f3 or queen d2 and long castle, and you were doing great here. The most common move from this position was now f5, at which point black tries to lash out but captures, and this is completely winning for you. I mean, takes back, this is completely falling apart for them. Alright, well, thank you for watching. The PGN for all these moves are in the description if you want to look at them yourself. Like and subscribe. Have a great day. I'll see you next time.